positions is what we have to fill. Plus, we've had actually another position where one of the commissioners had to step down, so we've had the alternate fill that position. And so we'll determine this, but that's why I'm saying really we have two, because most likely we'll have the person that's filling that position be the full term, but you know, that decision isn't made yet. So you've got 3 positions to be filled and then an alternate. And technically we could have 2 alternates, but I think it's yet to be determined exactly on that. Myself, I kind of want to hold off on that second alternate because I think that, you know, we functioned okay with just 1 alternate, and I think we need to give it more time before we do that.
So after you fill the 3 positions, you'll pick a chairman?
Yeah, then they will elect amongst themselves their chair and their vice chair or co-chair.
That's good.
Yeah.
Remind them what a co-chair does. They fill the chairman when he leaves. If they leave together, that's an issue.
Right. Well, that's a lesson learned.
Well, and it just started. So everybody came in together, basically. I think there's been 1 change since then, so that's easy to have.
It's up, it's up for a revote. Yeah,
2 years?
3 years, 3 years?
In 2025.
Yeah, 25. That's
So
right.
we're going to want to kind of just make the citizens aware of it and start campaigning and promoting it in 24 probably.
My discussions with anybody wearing ram always kind of in this uniform positive.
Yeah.
It's been
It's
well
been a good
received.
thing.
And the commission's done a good job on picking the projects.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all by submittal of the who's interested, but
We've done it
certainly.
well.
It makes a lot of sense for our city, just considering how much non-Layton residents come in here and spend money. So it's just a way for us to capture that. So it's nice to pass it on to the citizens.
As well as getting their input on what they'd like to see within the city as well.
Right.
So that helps. Anyway, anyone else have anything they want to report?
I will report for CTC. CTC has decided on 2 programs to support. One is Strengthening Families, which I announced last time, but I'll announce that again tonight. And then the other is Big Brothers Big Sisters. And so they do have some open committees that are short-term in nature, but they're looking for volunteers to participate on these committees. And so if you don't have a lot of time, I think it's like less than a month, you know, but it's really short-term to kind of get those programs up and running, because we're in that phase where we're going to start implementing. And so I know sometimes those 3 and 4 hour meetings are a little rough. So if you have a little bit of time and you're interested in really, you know, your expertise, then let me know and I can get in touch with Lisa. But yeah, we're moving forward on those 2.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on then to item number 2 within our work meeting, which Chad again is going to go over this municipal code for us.
Thanks, Mayor. This is something we talked about in our last, I guess, maybe it was a couple meetings ago. We talked about it before. But this is our change to our private street standards that are in the code. The text that you see on your agenda reflects a lot of small changes that really are meant to reorganize the code into a more easily administrated code, I guess is what it comes down to. So you see a lot of language there, but that just comes down to the fact that we had to move several sections of code into one to facilitate this. We talked about this at some length last time we got together, but really what we're talking about is, I guess, 4 major changes, or some are major, some are minor. But the first one is taking all of these separate sections of code and reorganizing them into a table format that's easier for us to administer and easier for the development community to find the standards that apply to their particular development. So that's the first thing, and that required us to amend quite a few sections of code to bring those sections into this table. As part of that reorganization, we also wanted to create some consistency. We found that a lot of the ways that we referred to private streets were using the same terminology for different types of private streets. So we tried to create really a nomenclature for these streets that can be consistent. So this private minor, private lane, private drive, private alley, all describe a very unique and distinct type of street that in this way we can be consistent throughout our code. When we tell a developer or someone looking to develop their property what those mean, we can say this is a private lane because it meets these particular criteria. So that's kind of the first big change in a nutshell. The second is to look at gates. And we talked about this a little bit last time, but we're trying to create a criteria or some standards that would tell us or inform when those types of gates can be installed on a private street. We have a lot of interest on these. This gives us standards that can apply to those, give, again, the development community an idea of what situations would allow for a gate to be installed. Third one, again, we're defining that one of the problems we've had in the past is that we've had private streets that have connected to public streets. That causes problems. And we've seen that. We've had a number of different communities that have come in and said, you know, we don't want to have to maintain this. In the past that was allowed, but we're being very clear that that's not going to be allowed any longer. You're going to have to, if you're building a development that's going to connect to public streets and you need that connection to facilitate your development, it's got to be public. It can't be private anymore. So we think that'll solve, you know, quite a few problems with these that occur when you have a private street connecting to public streets. And then just as a, I guess, fourth, as we looked at these standards, it became apparent that in our downtown and in other areas, we need to look at different easement standards to facilitate some of these types of developments. This particular standard has to do with our downtown and making sure that we can have that that urban core type feel there. We noticed that we had a standard that required front PUDs, that's our public utility and drainage easements in our downtown. This gives us the ability on those very specific instances, in this case our MUTOD zoning district, that you could waive that PUD if there were ways for that development to be served either through private easements or through improvements in the public right of way. In the case of our MUTOD zone, we have areas that are going to be redeveloped as part of our Main Street reconfiguration, and there'll be very, very wide sidewalks, very, very wide planter and amenity space out in front of these buildings that could accommodate those PUDs. So that allows us to scoot those buildings closer to the street, which is consistent with that urban form that we're trying to create in our downtown. So again, very, very, very specific, very surgical change there, but it does allow for that to be waived in those very, very specific instances. The other change has to do with our PUDs on just on general lots. Steve's also got that in the amendment that he's going to be talking about with our development standards, and maybe I'll let you talk a little bit about that issue with the drainage easements when you get there. Yeah. The only other thing I'll mention is that we had in our old code, we had a front to front setback. We added a rear to rear setback on our CTH zone. The reason for that, as we found, was that the development community was setting these buildings based on our street widths, which caused problems. We would have foundations and footings too close to these private streets, and so when they went in to put those foundations and footings, it would undermine those private streets and they'd have to go back and rebuild them. This makes it clear that you have a minimum street width of 26 feet, but you have to have a minimum separation between those buildings of 30 feet. That gives us a little bit of room so they don't have to go back in there and undermine those streets as they're digging those foundations. So that's predominantly the changes. You had a little while to look at this. We made it available to you the first go around, and then again this time I'd be happy to answer any questions. We are recommending that the council approve this ordinance change.
I have a question. I have a question about the private streets connecting to a public street. One, how many instances of that do we have presently? And then follow up to that, this amendment will apply to that, I'm assuming, or it will not?
No, those that have already been developed, we can't go back because they were designed that way. But we know, I mean, there are two that are very predominant for us right now that we work with a lot. I don't know the exact number if there's been others, but we have a couple that have been very, we've been working with over the last year or so, maybe a little longer than that, where we've seen problems. I will say that this was brought up at a time when we were approving another development, the development that's being built by Wright Development up on 193. And we had an opportunity there to say, you know, time out, we're not going to do this again. We've made that mistake before. So in that case, we stopped that development during that development stage. were able to get a public connection instead of a private connection through there, which solved that problem. So that was really the result of having a very cooperative developer that saw the kind of the greater good and said, yeah, we're not gonna push that issue. We'll allow that to go without any kind of pushback from the development. So I know of the two, I'm sure there might be other examples out there.
There's probably more, but I don't know off the top of my head how many there are.
Okay.
There's a couple that are being very vocal about their concerns with it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that's the predominant development pattern. Most of the time they want these streets to be public because then the maintenance of that is public for, you know, for perpetuity. But we do have sometimes, and a lot of times those were made private as a way to increase densities, and a way to facilitate more housing and more units in there. And what we found is that, you know, we can't just let that be the predominant reason. We have to make sure that we still have good connections through there, and that, you know, there is that perception that if you have a private street that connects two public streets, that they, you know, the folks that live on that private street do feel like they shouldn't have to maintain that. But again, this amendment is to make sure that in the future we just by ordinance we can't allow that anymore, so it's not an option for them.
What if that private development comes in and say, hey, look, we're tired of this, we'll upgrade the road, will you then take it over? Are we willing to do that?
The difficulty with that, I guess in a theoretical sense maybe, but the difficulty is that these subdivisions have been designed in such a way that it's almost always impossible for that to happen. They can't meet our sidewalk standard because they were built without sidewalks. A lot of times the widths are a little bit different than what we'd allow for a public street. So that, maybe Steve could chime in on other challenges there, but that's been our challenge, is that there's not a good way to convert those over to public streets because of the way they've been designed.
Yeah, and the utility maintenance and all of the other things that have, you know, lapsed or gone on, we don't have that history there. So it's very difficult for us to say, yeah, we'll take over something that maybe has been not necessarily neglected, but not maintained at the same standards the city would want, and then it wouldn't meet the standards that we would expect for today.
Like an irrigation company.
Are there any that cause problems because of a turnaround? Do the gate?
Not having enough room for a turnaround?
Not having,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it pulls in and the gate's down, and now how do they get out?
That's probably the biggest issue, particularly because a lot of times they'll have units there that if you were to install a turnaround, either that unit that's part of the subdivision would be outside of that gate, or just the units in such a place that you can't put a gate there because you're blocking a driveway. Or
Could they move the gate back?
again, that's where it becomes, now you have multiple homes that are outside of that gate that are part of this community.
Well,
With the new code, they have to be able to
Yeah, but
do
to
it
turn
through
around.
turnaround without
I'm not
impeding the
talking
existing flow.
a fire truck, I'm talking a car.
It
which-
needs to be
which
big
may
enough to,
require 5 feet.
no, it needs to be big enough to accommodate not just a car, but also delivery vehicles,
Oh.
fire apparatus, all those things that could need to get in there. So it is a pretty big amount of land needed for a turnaround for one of those. Now, if they design it up front, you can see in the
Well,
standards
yeah,
I've got up
right,
on the board, that
sure.
they could certainly do that. That's gotta be designed up
But
front.
to come back, so what do? Nothing?
In that case, they're
So
not
if
able
a
to
car
have a gate.
pulls in, it just gets out the way it can?
Well, in that case, we wouldn't allow gate on those existing ones.
Well, no, I understand that now. What about what's in? It's already there.
Yeah, we wouldn't allow a gate there either.
You what?
There's been
So we wouldn't
several,
allow a gate.
several have asked to put gates in situations that would create a hazard.
Yeah, no, I
So we
understand.
tell them you can't convert it over. You can't.
So
you
you've
can't-
already told people that are in this situation previous to this thought?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so.
What we're trying to do is prevent more of those from coming. And usually the developer's fine with it, but it's the HOA.
Yeah.
Once they have to take responsibility for the maintenance and the repair and so forth,
Right.
that's when the issue generally
Okay,
rises, and so.
So we left the public hearing open to allow for others to chime in. Did you get any?
Not yet, no, and they have been invited to this meeting, they know about the meeting, so we could potentially have someone, they were members of our development community that want some time to review it and comment. We haven't heard from them yet, so.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that some of the easement standards for the public utility and drainage, designed more for, mixed-use TOD zones. And those are urban-centric. I know there's areas inside developments, like the destination development, for example, that's not an urban area, but that has MUTOD. So do you think that's just a matter of aesthetics? Like it still looks good, and you still want it front facing, and it's not necessarily connected to urban, it's just the way the development's set up that it would be best to have those standards in that area.
So the destination is actually not MUTOD. There's only one MUTOD zone, which is right around.
I mean, like, there's not the whole zone, I just meant that there's portions of it that are mixed use.
Those are mixed use, but this would not apply just to a mixed use. It has to be that MUTOD zone. So this would be, right now, the only TOD that we have is around our front runner station. It could be conceivable in the future that some other TOD zones adopt it, but those would be the only places where it would apply. So the destination, they'd still have to have their public utilities, PUDs.
Back to gates. Gates for private drives and private lanes, they're permitted now, aren't they?
The code's kind of silent on it right now. That's one of the reasons to adopt this, yeah.
So when you do have one, I'm thinking of some, maybe they don't exist now, but thinking of lanes that might be a quarter mile long that's gated off. Is there requirements as far as fire access?
Yeah,
So the fire department can.
That number 4 right there covers that they have to still comply with all the international fire codes and meet those standards, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. You good for that?
Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. The next item up is an amendment for the development guidelines and design standards, which Steve, I believe, is going to go on that one.
You guys have already heard this one, so I don't know if I need to spend a lot of time on it, but, so tonight we brought back our development guidelines and design standards. If you recall, I think it was on the 4th of August, we had this in the work meeting, and then we pulled it because we realized there were some noticing requirements that needed to take place, so we did send out that notice to any impacted developer with an application into the city at the time. We didn't really receive any feedback from anybody on that, but it has been noticed properly, and so we are now able to hold a public hearing on it. As you recall, we keep these development guidelines, design standards that all the projects are built to. We have written standards and then the standard plans for public facilities construction. And then from time to time, we update the plans and the standards based on, current construction standards, regulations, city needs. So the big key updates on this one are our secondary water systems. Since we've acquired Case Creek Irrigation, we've added an entire section for city-owned secondary water systems that lays out how we want to see the pipes installed, the meters, all of those things. We have updated the thresholds for the traffic impact studies, and Bettina, you had a question on that one. We did verify that. The old edition of the ITE manual had a different number in it, and so the number that is there is correct. The number actually dropped from 11 down to about 3.5, and so that's where that difference in the size of what would trigger a study would come from. So we did the dedication plat lot line adjustment, the 5-foot rear lot line adjustment, or excuse me, the 5-foot rear lot line for the public utility and drainage easement. That is the one item that we've adjusted in discussions with Chad and his group, is we found that the 10-foot rear lot line PU&DE was probably too big now, as we don't allow side yard utilities and rear lot utilities. Those 10-foot utility easements in the backyards were probably excessive. Back in the day when they were putting secondary water lines and power and phone and cable back there, they probably needed that, but we found that 5 feet is adequate for the drainage needs that we have, and then it allows the property owners to use more of that yard that they have without encroaching into our easements. So we feel like that's a way for us to, still manage the drainage and the needs that we have, but also not have to have a lot of, discussions or disputes with property owners that want to put in facilities in the backyard. So we've clarified the street width standards and those definitions. Those do coincide with the private street standards that Chad just discussed, and then also the casing requirements for any water and sewer that cross under freeways and highways. That one's just there for Anytime somebody needs to put in a rather large, or cross a rather large road, we want to make sure it's clear that they're going to have to put that in the casing so that it can be maintained in the future. And then the standard plans were just updated to coincide with those written standards. So one slight change from what we presented in August to now is we added the punch list completion. We put a deadline on that of 60 days, and talking with our development partners as they have come in, they said that that's probably a little too tight for them, and so we've extended that to a 90-day window instead of a 60-day window for them. Felt like it was still manageable for us, but it also gave them enough time to get their contractors to respond in case there was some kind of an issue with supply chains and things like that. But right now there was no deadline, and so they would just, some of them let it go for quite a while. So anyway, those are really the updates we have. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just one, when they apply secondary water, do they apply meter?
Yes, they are required to put meters in.
So anybody from
They've been putting
this
meters
point,
in.
they have been doing that.
They have been doing that for a while because the state law changed.
Right, the state law changed.
But it is part of our standard that they are required to meter all their connections this month.
Okay.
So we won't have any connections made that won't have a meter on them in the future.
Right. So we'll just have to go back and do the older one.
Yes, that's what that grant we're applying
Yeah.
or applied for, and the loan is to go back and retrofit those other ones.
Okay. Anybody else, any questions?
Did you say what the easement was before?
It was a 10-foot. It was a 10-foot easement in the rear, and so you would actually have 20 feet in the back, in the two backyards if they backed up to each other, and now it'll be 5 on each side of that back.
Is that actually on the, I mean, are they usually on the property line, are you saying, or?
Yeah, the rear lot property line, so in the rear lot, they would either have had a 10-foot easement on each side of that, and we're saying now they need to just keep a 5, so that it allows.
Private utilities, the city doesn't really get into if a private utility has one that's bigger.
Yeah, those would be something, if it's a private utility easement, it would actually be separate from our 5-foot utility easement that they would call out specifically for an irrigation company or whoever needs that, or that private utility easement.
Okay.
Anybody else, any clarification on this?
No, thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did a good job last time and this time, then. Okay. We're now down to staff reports.
Thank you, Mayor. We have actually 4 items. We'd like to suggest that we go into a closed door meeting to talk about 3 of those that have to do with property acquisition and character and competence of the individual. Maybe before we do the closed, Mayor, suggestion we could do the other item, but not a closed, we have to closed door item, and that is wanted to chat, and maybe some of you are aware of this, maybe some of you are not, want to make you aware of a request that has been percolating and has actually been formally made to the city in a way that needs to be modified, but with regard to changing or unwinding a development agreement for an existing development to allow for different kinds of fencing than what was originally agreed to. I know the mayor's aware of that, but we wanted to make you aware of the background on that and what the request is and what the staff's position on this has been to date, based on our history of how we dealt with these. So I know that's fairly general, but check and fill in the details, and then we're just looking for some direction from the council, mayor, of course, as to whether to accommodate a discussion on it or whether not to. So it's essentially, again, the land has been turned over to HOA, so we have individual owners that are trying to ask for an amendment to a development agreement that applies to hundreds of properties. So we don't think that's a good precedent from staff's perspective, but we wanted to get the details because you'll probably hear about it eventually, if not so. With that.
Yeah. So in terms of just some background, the park is the development we're talking about right now, and of course the old Swan Lakes Golf Course out there. But when that was adopted or approved back in 2019, early 2019, as part of the development agreement, there was a restriction on the color of fencing in that particular development. The council and planning commission at the time had some feelings about the particular fence colors that should be allowed in that development. So a condition was adopted that prohibited white fencing or any other bright color with light reflecting glare, with one exception. I'll just show you the map. The exception was along the property line here on the east, where you already had existing development with white fences. That was carved out, so those lots right along that east property line were carved out of that. The remainder of the development, though, as Alex mentioned, you can see all the number of units there, including some townhome units. We've got these rear-loaded units that were built by Fieldstone that are single-family, but rear-loaded, and these that are being under construction by Richmond American Homes. So the remainder of those units, again, were required to have non-white fencing. Some opted for things like wrought iron. You'll see those around a lot of the Bryant homes. If you drive in the Fieldstone section, you'll see that it's all gray fencing, kind of a wood grain type of a fence. For the most part, as far as I can see, they all kind of matched in that development, and I think that was because they were installed by Fieldstone, but those don't have that white color. What's happened in this particular area, the Richmond American homes, these are single-family homes. They're on small lots, and as people have begun to occupy these homes, the fences were not built by the developer, and we've had some that have built white fencing in these areas. We've had 3 that have been built that way. Fences do not require a building permit, so the first time we find out about them is when they're constructed. Once we found out that those were being constructed, we very quickly alerted the property owners that that was not allowed. We also took some additional measures. We sent letters out to the remainder of the properties to remind them of that condition. One of the things that we've heard back from the residents that have installed those fences is that they weren't made aware. And we've had a lot of these discussions about how do we make people aware of these special conditions. In this case, we did a lot. We did a lot of notice on this. I want to just go through what we did. First of all, these are the copy of the actual CC&Rs, the conditions, covenants, and restrictions for that particular subdivision. And this covers the entire, when I say this subdivision, we're talking about the entire subdivision. So all of this development, this applies to everybody. First thing was it references the development agreement, that anything that's done, any improvements shall be performed in accordance with the development agreement. So that's right in the CC&Rs. A couple pages down, another place where it talks about community-wide standards, and it talks specifically about architectural, landscaping, and aesthetic matters have to be consistent with the requirements of the development agreement. Now, the development agreement itself is also attached to each of these properties. So if you were to go to the county and pull up the abstract or the deed record for those properties, each of those have that development agreement referenced and available. If you were to go there on the online system, you could very easily pull up that development agreement that has that specific restriction on the white fencing. So in addition to that, we wanted to, again, try to provide whatever we could to provide notice that this was a special requirement. So on every single building permit, every single one that's been issued in this subdivision, there's this note: fencing color shall not be white or any other bright color with a light reflecting glare, just to echoing that language in the development agreement. So that went out on every single building permit for this development. And that we feel like we've done what we could as a city to notify potential owners in there that they would not be able to have a white fence. We still had some go through with the concern that's been expressed is that they weren't aware that wasn't made known to them by the developer or the builder, but we felt like we did everything within our power to try to let them know about that. So again, this is just a copy of that abstract. You can see that that's the CC&R declaration, that's the agreement they're on. This is from one of the properties that's installed the white fence. It's on all of them. So I want to just go back to this map just for the purpose of discussion. Again, most of these are completed. They have the non-white fences that are installed in a variety of different forms. We have the 3 that have made a formal request to change this development agreement. There's kind of 2 pieces to this, and the first is why we're here tonight. This is an agreement. It's not a zone change. It's an agreement between the city and everyone really now in this development. It applies to everybody that's in there. It was entered into by the developer originally. As successors and heirs to that agreement, each of these property owners are now subject to that same agreement. And our concern really is about the agreement and kind of keeping that agreement whole. We think that it is a bad precedent for us after we've adopted a development agreement that has conditions attached to it. Whether you agree with those conditions or not, those were what were agreed to by the developer and that were added as a condition of approval for that development. So we are concerned about, again, taking after the fact and allowing someone to come in and just change that, especially particularly where we have many, many homes that have been built and they're compliant with that condition already. So that's why we're here. Our recommendation would be, the recommendation is based on this agreement, not looking at that wider approval for that entire subdivision, just that we do not modify that agreement. That agreement should still apply. And that's that. Again, happy to answer any questions, but we would like to get your feedback on that. But our recommendation would be not to entertain that modification.
Who was here besides Troy? Do you remember?
Well, you were on the planning commission probably.
I don't think that's what's even on the planning commission.
And do you recall that? I just want to know what the reasoning
Really,
behind it was.
It stemmed, actually, the planning commission was reviewing a lot of different, the building codes and material and everything, and there was a flavor of not wanting white fences everywhere, and they just felt like that this area was so dense, and knowing that there's that reflection off the white, that that's the reason why they really wanted to kind of make sure there was no white fencing here. So it got passed by both planning commission and the council, and honestly, it's about the development agreement. I mean, it was written in there for a reason, and that's why we need to probably honor that, because we don't want to get in the habit of unwinding any development agreement or what's used to having one, you know. So anyway, that was the reasoning behind it. Do you want to add to
We
that?
just had a couple of planning commissioners, I remember, that didn't like white vinyl fences.
Yeah, they didn't like them anywhere, and they were on it kind of it was a matter of reviewing a lot of different building materials and where you put the brick as well, and how much you wrap it around. I mean, they went through a whole plethora of standards that they wanted to see going forward.
I have one comment.
Okay.
I wasn't there, so I can't speak to any of that. As a homeowner, though, as most everybody else is also, I can understand why those who didn't know and got a white fence may have wanted one, because it probably matches their house. It probably looks better than the tan or whatever other colors. So I totally understand that it may be unfortunate that decisions sometimes are made based on, a preference. I think development agreements are set, and it's unfortunate that these folks didn't know. However they didn't know, it's unfortunate that that is the case. I would hope in the future that, we could look at things like this before they're set in stone. Because if we're concerned about property rights or whatever the case may be, that we would put such restrictions that seem a little nebulous to me, I'm just gonna say.
Well, I think initially,
But,
again, and on this particular property, this became kind of an interesting situation, because it was initially sold that it was one big development, and so that, I think everybody was under the impression that this was going to be controlled by one developer, and kind of the whole thing would have that same look, but then in reality it ended up being 3 different ones, right? So it was a lesson learned all the way around on several different things.
But it's one HOA.
Yeah, they have one big master HOA and then some smaller.
What's their process for the HOA? It's kind of their deal.
Yeah, they do have, within the CCNRs, there are provisions for them to review this type of a request, and they do have some architectural and material control. So we don't get involved in that process.
Right.
We know it's there, but certainly that's a place where this should have been flagged. It's It's on each and every one of these individual lots have this on their deed, on their title. It says that this development agreement applies to those properties. So, again, to Bettina's point, where that breakdown occurred, hard for us to say. We feel like we've done everything we could to try to make people aware that this is going to be a special requirement. We've been a little bit disappointed, frankly, with the developer in this particular instance, because as we've talked to them about that, and we've said, you have this on your plans, they've said things like, well, we don't use those approved plans when we talk to people that we're selling to, which is completely inappropriate. So,
But the fact is also, aside from that, is that everybody in all of those lots received a packet from the title company that had the CC&Rs and the development agreement. Some chose to read them, some didn't choose to read them. So yes, the developer should have, some developers did, they specifically called that out. But it appears that some read those documents and some didn't. That's the challenge, aside from what the developers didn't do, or the city did or didn't do, is that some folks just chose not to read those agreements, not knowing what was in them. And that's basically the excuse, which we understand, is I didn't know this was, well, you didn't know because maybe the developer didn't tell you, you didn't know because the city, you didn't look at the city documents, but you also didn't know because you didn't read the packet that you got before you signed on the dotted line. I'm not trying to be callous about that, but that's the challenge now, because we've had several, as this thing's kind of percolated, Chad can add to this, but there are other people who had the same desire but knew they couldn't because they had read the documents. And so they've approached us a little bit preemptively and said, we're not going to be very happy if now we complied and now the city allows this to be unwound, because we would have put that in, but we knew because we read the documents that we couldn't do that. So it's
That was my.
just a quagmire.
That was my way of looking at it, is that I think if someone would have said at the beginning, before any fences had been put in, one of the first owners wanted to, hey, we don't really like this, we want to change it. Maybe I think that's maybe a more meaningful discussion, but I don't think it's fair when you are this far into this development to just have a couple of people come in and say, well, actually, we think we want to change it because of just the reason you mentioned that it's set. And there was a design that was passed and it was approved. It's on all the properties. And I'm not sure what else you want us to do to make it right for you, because making it right for you would be making it unjust for the people who try to comply with what we had before. So, and I don't think it sets a good precedent for the design standard and the development agreements moving forward. I'm fine with changing development agreements, but I don't think it's, in these types of situations, this isn't meet that standard.
Who's in charge? Who's in charge of this?
Of the
Not
development.
of the agreement. Who's in charge now? Who has to go back to Bob and say, you got the wrong color fence, you gotta change it?
So that would be administered by the Community Economic Development
That's
Department.
the HOA.
City.
Right
No,
now,
that's
it's
still the city.
on us. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then that, I agree in the respect of what's happened. I don't necessarily agree with whoever made the idea of white fences. But I agree that whatever was made should be kept the same. If it's good for one, it has to be good for everybody. And so that has to be changed. And so if that's our responsibility, that's fine, with the exception that whoever's selling these things better make that plain and clear too. So, but I agree with everybody that what's been done has been done. And so that's the way it should be.
Okay.
So our hope is that by being able to have this discussion and then be able to communicate that we've had this discussion and represent that position, that it will forestall more meetings and public discussions and formal applications and all the kinds of things that that may result in, to just prolong some that isn't gonna be changed, so.
Just out of curiosity, I can't remember how it was worded in the policy, but the homes on the east side of 1925, are they allowed to have white side fences between the lots?
Yes, yeah, they can match that existing white fence that was on the back.
So, it's probably to see their neighbor.
Creates an awkward
Yeah.
situation between neighbors, yeah.
Really, the developer should have put the fence in and made it part of the
Yeah.
purchase price,
Yeah.
so that didn't have any of this problem going
Well,
on.
yeah, there's a lot of things we wish things would happen
I know.
to take
Like I said,
care of.
there's a lot of lessons
I have
learned
one question,
out of
can you
this
paint it?
whole situation. Go ahead.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know much about the painting and vinyl fencing, probably not the best, but,
Well,
Does it
You're thinking
stick?
of your teenagers, Dave.
well, you know,
No spray
it
paint.
just saved me, that's the first thing I thought, well, I'm not gonna tear it out, I'll just paint it.
I
Yeah,
don't know that I'd recommend it, but I don't know.
well, it doesn't matter what you recommend, it's what's legal.
Yeah. I don't think, that- yeah.
I just wondered, I don't want that to go,
So the
take
remedy,
that off
Really?
that.
the remedy for the homeowner though, would just be discussions with the fencing company about, we were unaware of this situation and see what we can do. If that doesn't go anywhere, then they can talk to the HOA about potentially changing the standards. Is that right?
No,
Well,
No, this is the development agreement standards.
Yeah,
I meant
this is-
you mentioned the architectural design and all that stuff.
That,
You meant
that's,
that should have that should have happened before
that,
they really ever.
yeah, the HOA should have informed them of the development agreement, but the development agreement's with the city.
Okay.
So, yeah.
so Chad, are you done?
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't want to.
my question was really just the remedy for the homeowners who put in, I mean, I feel bad they put in a
Yeah, I
fence.
do.
But hopefully they can get that worked out with the fencing company.
So let me ask this, because this is kind of an additional trend that's out there as well, is you can have your white post, you can have your white top rail, bottom rail, but the inside can change out. Are we willing to accept that?
Yeah, we've let
Because
several of those.
I think that would be at least an easier solution for those folks to have to change
be
out.
cheaper.
If you drive out there now, there's
Yeah,
at least two of those that have done that.
Okay.
And
Well, I just
one-
want
one
to make
under
sure we're
construction.
clear, if we're giving you this head nod, that
Yeah.
we're good with that as well.
We're gonna be as flexible as we can with that, but, yeah.
So Chad, just to be clear, this is a development agreement, and it's with the developer at the time, or there was one developer when the application came in, and now that agreement is between city and individual landowners. Is that
Yeah, each of those landowners inherits that.
nothing with the HOA?
It's with the owners, and the original development agreement was not signed by the developer, it was signed by the property owner that owned this at the time, so, yeah. So it goes with the land.
Okay. We're good, I'm just going to move on, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Does that give you clear enough direction?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it looks better, but.
All right. Okay, well, that's pretty much it, unless we go into a closed door meeting. However, on the mayor's report, I just want to quickly say, thanks to everybody that did help on that 9/11 project. That was a lot of work. Layton City stepped up and did, kind of took the lead in many different avenues on that. And, I thought it was successful. Each one of you guys have done a lot on the various committees, and I just want to express that and say thanks. Because I know it's additional time and a lot of work in some cases, and in other cases you kind of get a little break, but I appreciate it. I don't really have, I kind of gave you the updates on many of the committees I've been on at this point, so I don't have anything more other than to say thanks. Okay, with that, I guess you want to go into a closed door meeting? Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone out to our city council tonight for September 15th. We're just got a slight delay here, but we appreciate your patience. As customary, we have one of our council members they actually present the pledge and the prayer. And so, Mr. Roberts, I believe you're up. Councilman Roberts.
First off, for the prayer myself. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the opportunity to gather as citizens of this great city and conduct the business of the city. Father, we're grateful for the favorable conditions in which we gather this night. We're grateful for the moisture that we have received recently in this time of drought that we have faced for some time. We're grateful for the blessings that help us, and we pray for further moisture to fill our reservoirs and help us to maintain the lives we desire to live. Father, we're grateful for all the people who serve this community and this country to make it a great place to live. Father, in addition to first responders and all of our great city employees, we're grateful for the citizens of this city that take it upon themselves to serve each other and help out their neighbors. Father, we thank Thee again for all of our many blessings that Thou givest to us, and we pray for Thy guidance and Thy inspiration as we conduct the business of this city this night, and we ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was very warming to hear that many voices say the pledge. I mean, thank you. That was good. Okay, council, we have 3 sets of minutes that we need to approve tonight. Do any of you have any corrections or changes you need to make to any of them? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the minutes Layton City Council work meeting May 5th, 2022, Layton City Council meeting minutes of July 21st, 2022, and the minutes of the City Council meeting August 18th, 2022 as indicated.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we approve the minutes as written and stated. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're down to, we've got our municipal announcements to make. Council, I'll allow you to make your announcements, but before you get started, I do once again want to extend our heartfelt appreciation to all the citizens that showed up on this past Saturday and helped one another and actually did a lot of different service projects for our city. We appreciate it. It was, I got to tell you, very inspiring and heartfelt to see and go around and see everybody working the way they did. And they did a fantastic job. I mean, even the little ones painting, I mean, or even scrubbing fences. I mean, it was very well done. So thank you. Thank you for the commemorative service for the 9/11. Okay, what announcements have we got for this week?
I have a couple. So actually tonight at 8 p.m., Davis Arts Council is sponsoring a free show for Ballet West. It was going to be here in the amphitheater, but we don't want them to get rained on. So it has been moved over to the Layton High School auditorium. So when you leave here, you can feel free to go on over there. Also, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and the Layton Communities That Care is doing a lot of things just to help prevent suicide in our community for young people. So I just want to remind everyone of the suicide hotline, which is that number 988. So if anybody is experiencing suicidal thoughts or you know someone who might need some help, 988 is that number. And lastly, the Strengthening Families Workshop is also being sponsored by the CTC, and that's starting on October 3rd. It'll be a 6-week program. It's for all families who have children ages 10 to 14. If you want to sign up for it, it's free. They'll offer dinner as well as childcare. You can go to the Davis Behavioral Health website and sign up there.
Excellent. I'd love to see that communities that care get off the ground the way it has and really offer a lot of good classes and direction there. Okay, anything from Parks and Rec?
Thank you, Mayor. Layton City Parks and Recreation will be hosting a family recreation event tomorrow evening, September 16th, 7:30 to dusk. 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. 7:30 is dusk, isn't it? Park after dark. There'll be a lot of activities, games, roast s'mores with your family, live DJ, just a lot of things to get together and have fun in the park. So, tomorrow evening, 7:30 p.m.
Okay. Okay. Is there any others? If not, I'll just make one quick announcement excuse me? I got to look at it. It's the 28th. Yeah. Which one of you guys can do that? And I'll go ahead and continue. So anyway, what I was going to say is there's a couple more things. Is October 8th, the Davis Arts Council is actually having the active pages, and they're going to do the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So you can come over here, and they'll give you the readings. And you do need to get a ticket, although it's free. So if you're interested in that, they have 2 different readings. One at I think around 4 o'clock, and the other one is at 7 or 7:30. But anyway, it's a fun event. It's great for the kids. It goes quick, so that's why I figure you might want to jump on it since we've got a good crowd here. And the 2 to 4 is the first one, and then the other one's 6 to 9. But also the Layton Rotary Club will be, depending on the weather, they will either be selling hot chocolate or have root beer. So you'll also be able to get a beverage there as well. So anyway, do you want to go ahead and mention one of you guys?
On the 28th of September, which is a Wednesday, out at the fire station on 2200, there'll be the Kendall Bryant open house. So Kendall Bryant was a Layton Fire Department fireman who lost his life. And so every year, the fire department puts together an open house where they can show how to prevent fires and give more education to the community. And it's a wonderful event, lots of individual activities for children and for families, and they always do a really good job. So again, that's Wednesday the 28th, 5 o'clock out at the station on 2200 West.
Good.
Yeah, if you want, sorry, Mayor. If you want to
good.
see a turkey explode in oil, come down. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, they do a great job on education there, and a lot of good booths available for you to kind of just learn different things. So fantastic job on that. Okay, that concludes our municipal announcements. We'll now go on to our verbal petitions and presentations, which is kind of exciting tonight. We got a couple of different presentations. And the first presentation is actually going to be presented by our chiefs. So if we can have Chief Alan Swanson and Chief Kevin Ward come up. Oh, yeah, we got more. And, yeah, the one who gets to read it all.
That's right. Mayor and council, thanks for the opportunity to be here as the police and fire department tonight to recognize the actions of 4 community members during a drowning incident from earlier this year. As I'm sure you know, we're very fortunate to live and work not only in this city, but in a community that consistently shows enormous support and gratitude for both police and fire departments. Tonight, it's our turn to show some gratitude for the efforts of 4 outstanding members of our community. So with that, if I could have Ryan Hicks, Harrison Jackson, William Giles, and David Felt come forward. On May 21st of this year, 17-year-old Riley was attending an end-of-school pool party. Riley was not intending to go to the party, but at the last minute decided to attend. While swimming with friends, Riley went unconscious and slipped under the water. Harrison and William recognized the emergency and without hesitation, both jumped into the pool. They located Riley, pulled him to the side of the pool, and lifted him out of the water. Ryan Hicks, a certified CPR instructor, and the homeowner, David Felt, became aware of the situation and immediately performed a patient assessment and correctly determined the CPR was a necessary life-saving measure. Both Ryan and David administered CPR for 5 continuous minutes before the first police officer arrived and assumed responder care. Layton fire personnel arrived and continued life-saving treatment and transported Riley to the hospital. Riley was in critical condition and he was placed on life support technology. Over the next several weeks, Riley's condition slowly improved, and eventually he was discharged to a rehab center for long-term care. Due to the quick, life-saving actions of Harrison and William, Riley spent only 29 seconds underwater. Ryan and David's correct administration of emergency care following Riley's recovery from the pool no doubt directly contributed to saving Riley's life and gave the advanced medical teams an opportunity to continue life-saving care. Mayor and Council, on behalf of the police and fire department, it's an honor to award Ryan, Harrison, William, and David with what I think is the first ever combined Layton Police and Layton Fire Citizen Life Saving Award. And if I could, I would just like to see if Riley would stand for us. He's in the audience with his family and give him that.
Wow. How courageous these young men were and is, and set a fine example for the rest of us. I'm sorry to tear up about this, but you guys saved a life, and that's something to be proud of. And I'm glad that the young gentleman's here today to be able to witness this. And on behalf of the mayor and council, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you also to both the fire and police department for your quick actions as well. Well, that's not the only youth action we get to take tonight. It's kind of exciting on these presentations that you're also going to be able to witness our youth council getting sworn in tonight, which we're very proud of, these young students that are willing to represent our city and to be able to learn about the local government as well as jump in and do service projects. So I'm going to invite Karen Smith. I know, Karen, you're down there. Do you mind coming up and kind of talking about this fine group and introducing them to us?
Mayor, thank you, council members. What an honor it is to be able to associate with such great young people, to be here to see the young people who saved a life. And how impressive that is, and what an impact those 4 young men had on one life and on the rest of us. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to mention a couple of things about Layton Youth City Council. these are amazing, amazing kids. We just are grateful for the support that you as a council give us. So I want to have, where is Lindsay? So I'm Karen Smith, I'm one of the advisors. Lindsay Ingebrigtsen is the other co-advisor, and Dave Thomas on the council is our liaison with the city council. We appreciate his help and his support. We have 18 members of the youth council. What I'm going to do, guys, is have you, this is going to be a little fire drill, but I need you to line up alphabetically here in this little semicircle. So go. Alphabetically by last name.
That's alphabetically.
Let's see, where have we got? A's right here, because this is Andreasen.
This was it. Yeah, this is a different
All right. Okay. Think we've got this. Let's see. Everest, yeah, slide over, scooch around. We want to see your wonderful faces. Okay, so we're just going to go real quickly. I'm going to introduce each of them. I want you to know that we have here represented 4 high schools. We have Layton and Davis and Northridge and New Ames. We have 2 middle schools, or junior high schools. We have Fairfield and Central. These kids are in grades 9 through 12. They volunteer their time. We meet at the same schedule that the adult city council meets. We meet every first and third Thursday. And these young people are learning on the first part of the month, they learn about the government, how it works. The second meeting that we have, they do acts of service. We've done everything from Sub for Santa to trail cleanup to helping the Rotary Club. We've done lights at the light parade. We've been handing out popsicles at the parade. These kids have had kind of a wide variety of experiences. So I just want to introduce you to the most amazing group of kids on the planet, according to me. First of all, Mia Aguilar, she's going to be our co-city recorder. Jordan Andreasen is our co-publicity chair. London Andreasen, and what we're looking for, we have 10 seniors in this group. So as we watch these kids graduate, it kind of gives us a little bit of pause because we want the younger ones. So we're grateful for the younger ones that are coming up, and they're inviting their siblings and their friends. Zadie Arciniega and Zenya Arciniega, would you wave? We've got Kira Baldwin, who is our mayor this year. Danelia Borgia is our co-publicity chair. Josh Checketts and his sister Lexi have joined us this year, and we're really excited to have them. Brooklyn Gallup is our co-city recorder. Lydia Garza is brand new with us this year, and we're so excited to have her. Erin Harding, I'm going to wave, is our mayor pro tem, which means she gets double year. She's going to be mayor pro tem this year and will be mayor next. Then we have Catherine Houghton, who is our city manager. Emery Ingebrigtsen is our tech support, which is, I'm finding that if I need anything to happen, I need it to happen technically with the kids, not with the adults. They take care of everything. Casey Ingebrigtsen is our photographer. Maggie Michelson is new with us this year. Ian Scatty's brand new with us this year. And Everest Stratton is our first ever Mayor Emeritus. So he was our mayor this last year, and we cannot lose his experience. So he is our Mayor Emeritus. Would you please give a round of applause to these young people? So now that they're ready to be sworn in, who administers the oath?
That'd be Kim Reed, our recorder.
Oh, we've been talking all day today.
Okay. I need you each to raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear. That I will support, obey, and defend. the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Utah, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. Congratulations.
Mayor Petro, one of the things we would like to do is ask if when you're finished with these kids, if they and their parents can go downstairs for just a brief social.
We would love that. And if you would, maybe since you're already in order, start at that end and come up and let us shake your hands. And I probably at the end, I'm going to have Councilman Thomas give just a brief statement, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'm going down with refreshments.
You guys.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Mayor Emeritus. Oh, yeah. Ready to go.
Yeah, bye. Okay, Mr. Thomas, you're standing between them and snacks or treats or refreshments.
You know, every council, they usually meet at 4, and it's fun to see them come in. They're anxious. There's things that need to be done. They're learning. I'm learning myself that this is a youth council. At first, I thought it was more of a leadership type thing, which it is in essence, but it's about youth council and about what we do and how we do it. And I see some of you, like the mayor, struggle at the pulpit. And I think of myself struggling at the pulpit, just like you are. But I know you can find people in this city, youth, that are as good as you are. But I know you can't find anybody better. And I applaud you for that. You're doing good things. You're learning great things. And one day, you may be standing here doing the same thing I'm doing, probably a lot better because you've had experience. The only experience I ever got was yelling at people. And this is great. I'm not overly thrilled with the youth of this world, but I am thrilled with the youth that I see and those that I meet is changing my mind. There are great people out there, and you yourselves are those people that are changing my mind. I thank you.
Congratulations. We will give you a minute if you, are you wanting to go now? Because you can be excused. We understand it, but thank you. Thank you for doing this for us. Wow, that's impressive to have that many parents support them. That's all. Great. I got to say thank you, parents. This is good. I love the support as well. Okay. While they're exiting, I'll go ahead and comment that actually, we're down to our citizen comments. So if there's anyone in the audience that wish to make a comment at this time before the council, you're more than welcome to. Just please state your name and address for the record. And if you're representing a group, you're welcome to speak a little bit longer. Otherwise, we hope that you can be direct.
Hello, Mayor, Council. My name is Daniela Harding. I live at 1506 East, 2050 North here in Layton. I am here representing the citizens of Hidden Hollow. We are citizens who are committed to responsible development in our neighborhood. Before you on your agenda tonight, you have a plat amendment for Shepherd's Ridge. This is an issue that we have been involved with for the better part of 5 years. Now, I know that I'm usually limited to 3 to 5 minutes, but I would ask for your indulgence and allow me to go just a little bit longer. This issue has been 5 years in the making. First and foremost, I would like to ask that you pull this item out of consent and have a thorough discussion about it tonight. It sorely needs it. I read the Planning Commission notes for it on August 23rd, and I feel that what was said was a gross misrepresentation. I think it's important to note, and I was a planning commissioner for the better part of 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. When this Shepherd's Ridge initially came before the Planning Commission, I initially said in the September 8th, 2015 Planning Commission meeting minutes, and I won't read everything that I said, but there were 2 things I specifically asked for, and both did not happen. Number one, Mr. Ed Gertch, who does own the property, he is allowed to have an accessory structure on his property somewhere. However, with this being sensitive lands, a third-party review was needed, and in 2015, that was denied. Under our current code, a third-party review, a geotech review, is allowed. And with this being sensitive lands, I highly suggest that that take place. It is important that we have that third-party review, and we don't just have whom the applicant wants as the sole geotech study review. Secondly, so those were the 2 things. Now, I'm a bit concerned that there were 4 charges brought against Mr. Gertch in 2019, and I will quickly read them. Charge 1, no building permit was obtained. Charge 2, setback violation. Charge 3, failure to obtain accessory structure permit. And charge 4 was a nuisance building or structure. Now, Mr. Gertch has placed a shipping container on the back of his property. And in the Hidden Hollow subdivision, this is something that when we look up from our subdivision, this is what we see, is this awful, ugly shipping container, which Mr. Gertch has also painted trees on it, I guess, for an aesthetic feel. I'm not sure. It is not a shed. It is not a buildable shed. It is a shipping container, and it is ugly, and it is something that the citizens in Hidden Hollow have had to deal with for the past 5 years. Now, tonight, they want to change before you is to allow for the setback to be changed so he can, quote, come into compliance. I really feel that Mr. Gertsch is being rewarded for bad behavior. To be honest with you, he is not planning on, at least to my knowledge, removing this shipping container or at least making it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And thus, by moving that setback, shipping to the east on sensitive lands, I don't know what he's going to do next. But we do know in Hidden Hollow that we have sensitive lands surrounding us. And this is something I brought my neighbor here tonight who knows all about sensitive lands, had her home fall on Sunset Drive because of sensitive lands. So while the Shepherd's Ridge subdivision is a beautiful addition to our area, this backside of the property needs to be left completely untouched. I would strongly recommend that this issue either be tabled tonight or that working with Mr. Gertsch find something that he comes into compliance with Layton City Municipal Code and Development Standards. Because we don't want to set a precedence that a shipping container is allowable under our standards. It is not. He needs to come into compliance, put something up that actually is allowable, and we all move on. It's very easy. But for some reason, that hasn't happened for 5 years. Furthermore, this is my last comment, and thank you for indulging me. Okay. This has been 5 years in the making. The last time I came to this council and I spoke at this microphone, I asked for an update on this particular issue. I was granted an update a couple of days later. I thought incorrectly that the citizens of Hidden Hollow, or at least myself, would be granted further updates. We were not. This became a consent item to go through tonight. Transparency is of the utmost importance between government and between the citizens. So I would like to ask you to pull it out of consent tonight, have a very, very good discussion about it for the citizens like myself who live in Hidden Hollow and are concerned about this issue affecting our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who has a different topic or wish to speak to the council tonight?
Do you care what side I'm on?
It doesn't matter. Just make sure you state your name and address for the
Do I
record.
have to be in a microphone, or can I walk back and forth? My name is Donna Chipman. I live at 1548 East, 2050 North, and I used to reside on Sunset. My house was in a sensitive lands area. We went with the geotech. We did everything the geotech said we had to do. We went with the city. We did everything the city said that we had to do. And because our neighbor let his broken sprinkler pipe run for 24 hours, we lost our house. It was not our fault. We did everything. I don't know if you understand the ramifications of what happens when you lose your house this way. You don't get insurance. We lost and had to start over with nothing in the bank. We rented for years because we were like newlyweds, starting over with nothing because someone didn't care. And that's what I see. I see this gentleman up there on his little bobcat pushing dirt around, thumbing his nose at regulations. If the land moves, who cares? I care. It's going to affect people beside himself. And he doesn't care. He gets cited by the city, he thumbs his nose. He does whatever he wants. We watch him do this over and over again. When we had our house slide, Layton City told us to shut up and sit down. My husband was told what was more important, his job or being quiet about it. And he no longer works for the city. He was done. That should never have happened, and this should not happen where it's like, well, let's reward this gentleman's bad behavior by just patting him on the back and allowing him to say, you know what, sensitive, schmensitive, I'll just do whatever I want. You give him an inch, he's gonna take a mile, and it will affect someone else. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak tonight?
Good evening. My name's Ed Gertsch. I live at 2222 Church Street. This is one of those situations, probably better off not to say anything, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. First of all, we did do some extensive stuff. For instance, the lady was concerned about water being left on my sprinkling system. I had to put a sensor on so that if for any reason the water stays on, it'll shut my main off so that we won't have any erosion problems. We've had several geotech reports. And the geotech report that established the sensitive line in the first place, we took their recommendations and did exactly what they said to do to mitigate the chances for a slip. And so that was the reason we did what we did, and we cut where we did by taking pressure off the hillside. So we took care of that. They mentioned that it's been 5 years. It seems more like 20 to me, but we've worked hard with the city and with those in the positions that have to do with each of the departments of the city to make sure we complied with the stuff that they've asked us to do in order to do what we're asking to do. And I'll just make one other quick comment. Back when I got the subdivision approved in the first place, and this lady that was on the planning commission should be able to verify this, I had intended at all times to put my construction shop back there. When I applied for it, it was my understanding that I could build in my backyard anything that was not inhabitable. But somehow that's not the way it got approved. Not everybody understood it the same way, and so the way that it was written in the approval was what we had to go by, and that's why we've gone through these steps to get it changed. I'm familiar with the former planning commission members' dislike of the structure. By the time I dug my footings, I got called into the city and said that this particular person had concern about my house being too big for my lot. Well, my lot's almost 3 acres, it's 2.6 acres or something like that. I can easily have the size of home I want. And then it was too tall, and then it wasn't being taken care of. And they all said that she just doesn't want any, the comment was that we were taking away their deer field where the deer like to play and stuff, and I know change is difficult, but the fact of the matter is I am zoned agricultural. I'm allowed to have accessory structures. And by having those containers there and that carport, that is going to keep the tractors and the equipment away from their eyesight, and it's by far a better thing. And I appreciate the efforts of the council and all those in the city departments to get us to this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, council, I'm going to move on to our consent items. As you know, these items we can act upon in one single motion. And based upon the comments here tonight, would anyone like to perhaps deal with items A and C first and pull item B off separately?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I move that we consider item B separately this evening.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. No opposed, right? Okay, then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go through our consent items, starting out with item number A. And tonight, all three items in our consent will be presented by Mr. Chad Wilkinson. So Chad, if you could, we'll have you just remain at the podium.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We do have three items on the consent agenda tonight. We'll start off with the first one, which is the Nalder Heights Subdivision First Plat Amendment. Just to give a little background on the property, it's located at 1311 East Sundance Circle. That red dot on the map represents the approximate location. A little bit closer view of that with some zoning information on the map there shows the properties outlined that are proposed for amendment tonight. You can see that this particular property fronts on Sundance with a kind of a big area that would be added to that property. But by way of background, this property came in for an application for a building permit for an accessory structure to place on this area here, located where my mouse is, the cursor. That's located to the east of the primary property there. As we reviewed that, we discovered that at some point in the past, an unauthorized lot had been created. It was recorded at the county, but was not ever gone. It didn't ever go through any kind of subdivision amendment or lot line adjustment parcel or process, excuse me. So we did alert the property owner to that and let them know that they would have to go through that process in order for that to become a legal authorized parcel in addition to their existing lot. So the purpose of tonight's amendment, proposed amendment, would be to, again, add this property shown where my cursor is to the property that fronts on Sundance Circle as part of a subdivision amendment. It would impact two different subdivisions because of the existing lot being in the Eastwood Estates and the Nalder Heights subdivision. So that would amend that. It would become its own new subdivision, this first amendment of Nalder Heights subdivision. A couple other maps just to show you. This is the existing Nalder Heights current plat with that little red addition showing the approximate location of that small parcel to be added. And then again, just showing the existing location on the Eastwood Estates Phase 2, where on the back of that property. I'm going to go back to the aerial photo just to show you. You can see on the Eastwood Estates, each of these lots in this area have kind of a large, they're kind of long, deep lots. They have kind of a large area behind them. And that's the area that's proposed to be added to this lot that fronts on Sundance. This was reviewed by the Planning Commission on August 23rd. And the Planning Commission did vote to recommend the council approve this subdivision plat amendment, and staff would also concur with that recommendation. Be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay, council, any questions on this? Well, guess not.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're standing up there. Would you mind going on to item number C then?
Absolutely. I'm going to have to skip forward on my presentation here for just a moment. So the request before you is a license agreement for BJ's Auto. Just to give a little bit of background on this particular application, this is the existing BJ's Auto Tire Pro automotive repair use. They have requested an opportunity to expand their use to include some additional service bays. That particular use requires the provision of additional parking. Off-street parking for both employees and for their customers. The applicant has requested that the city consider the use of this area, which is an old right-of-way, old Fort Lane right-of-way, for the use of employee parking and to use that as to meet the requirements of that proposed expansion. The city staff have reviewed that request. Again, this is an old right-of-way. I'm going to just, for fun, show you a picture that we found in our old files. This is the area before a lot of the development occurred. We could probably spend hours just looking at this photo. I have. It's pretty cool, but you can see the old alignment of this roadway. That roadway was abandoned with the realignment in anticipation of the freeway. And that's where we get this old abandoned right-of-way. The reason the city does not want to vacate that area is that we have a number of utilities that run through there as part of that old road alignment. So we want to hold on to that, but we do feel that it would be allowable for this use to use that property for the purpose of parking. The attached agreement would require maintenance of that area by the applicant. It also requires access to the two properties that continue to use this as their primary access. Now, I wanted to mention that this will also be required to go through a site plan review. At that site plan review, we can make specific conditions that will regulate that access and what that looks like, and we will do that. So there will be some specifics that designate how much of that needs to be kept open for good, viable access for those two users that are using that property. With that, there's some other details in that agreement. It does allow for us to rescind the agreement through the notice process if we should deem that we need to use that land for whatever purpose in the future, and it would require whatever changes to the use would be required to make that happen as well. So with that, this again also is something that staff is recommending the council approve.
Okay, council, do you have any questions on this?
Does that road have two accesses?
It does not.
Top and bottom?
Nope, just up here off of this, the new Fort Lane realignment there, so
Okay,
this
so
is
the
closed
bottom
off completely.
still
Yep,
stays the way it is.
that's right, yeah, and that's closed off completely there.
Okay.
Chad, I'm just curious, were they already doing this? Were they already using it?
I think informally, but never
Just-
without any authorization, yeah.
But now they want to,
Formalize it?
yeah, so
Yep.
good.
Yep.
Okay.
And as part of this expansion, this is the right time to formalize that. Yep.
Where are they planning on expanding at?
So they've got a tire corral right in this area that they would put some additional service base.
Okay. Well, I know you addressed my concern, so I appreciate that. So, because I was concerned about the existing daycare center and the other one to the north there, but as long as we can work that out, I don't have a problem. But does anybody else have any questions? Okay. All right, very good. Well, that's the two items within the consent item that we will act on one single motion. So I'll entertain a motion regarding the First Amendment at 11:30. Well, I'll let at 1311. Excuse me, East Sundance Circle, and then Resolution 22-54 at 685 South Main.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve item A, First Amendment for the Nalder Heights subdivision, and item C, a license agreement for BJ's Auto, Resolution 22-54.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we adopt both items as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll now go on to item number B, which is a amended plat. And Chad, would you mind explaining this to us?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Gonna just, I might have to do my second party authentication here. Just one second. No, I'm good. It came back up. So, this, I'm gonna go back in my report here. As was mentioned, this is an application for a subdivision amendment to the Shepherd's Ridge subdivision. Again, approximate locations shown there with the red dot on the map, approximately 2230 North Church Street. These are the particular lots in that subdivision that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is, you can see these are lots, let me get the right numbers here, but I believe that's lot 101 and 102 of the current recorded plat. The current proposal would amend the existing subdivision to move a static slope setback line that was recorded as part of this plat. I want to just take just a few moments to describe what that means and what that meant at the time that this was originally approved. So as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, when this subdivision was approved, there was a series of geotechnical reports that were completed as part of that. They were reviewed by a third-party review at the time. As part of that recommendation on the subdivision, there was what they call a static slope setback line that is here. It's the further west of those two highlighted lines that I'm showing on the plat. That line included a restriction for any kind of building to the east of that particular line, and that was based on some of the geotechnical conditions of the property, and the potential for problems should there be a structure of any size built on that particular area of the lot. So this particular property, as was mentioned, there was a structure that was constructed east of that line. It included a fairly large carport-type structure with some, we refer to them as Connex containers, but it's those portable storage containers that are located right where my mouse is. That was something that was part of a code enforcement action that was taken to really to look at those conditions of that subdivision, which again required that there not be any structures east of that line. And also part of that was that the structures are fairly large and did not have the any kind of building permit applied. So as we went through that process, and we worked with Mr. Gertsch, one of the things that was, I guess, proposed was that there be a new analysis of that particular static slope setback line that could take place to see if it was appropriate to allow those structures to remain. That additional geotechnical study was performed. The purpose of tonight's amendment would be to move the static slope setback line from its existing location here, where I'm showing you to the west, move that further east. Just to give you an idea on this, hopefully you can see that aerial photo a little bit, but you can see this is the existing carport structure that was built. That new static slope setback line is that blue line represented on the map. The old one is the line shown in red. So that would place that new static slope setback line to the east of the structure. There was, as I said, a geotechnical report that was completed as part of this analysis. That geotechnical report indicated that based on some of the things that had taken place, removal of some of the soils on the lot, that the loads for that particular property were taken down. The loads on the slope, that's the weight of that soil essentially on those areas, that those have been decreased enough to justify keeping that existing carport structure and those Connex containers on the lot with the types of equipment that the property owner had indicated they would store there. This was the subject, as you saw in your staff report, of a settlement agreement with the property owner. Part of that settlement agreement is that no new structures can be built east of the old static slope setback line on that particular lot. So those existing structures would be allowed to remain. However, there would be no new allowances for new structures on that east of that the old static slope setback line. There were other provisions in that settlement agreement that was part of working through these issues, mostly related to, again, the geotechnical conditions of that property, including making sure we didn't place water in those very sensitive areas, didn't have sprinkler systems that were allowed to irrigate that and to cause potential for additional sliding in that area, among other things. So this particular amendment, again, would move that static slope setback line from that current location. We'll go back to that one where you can kind of see both. Current location located here with the red to that new location shown in the blue, would allow for those structures with proper obtaining of building permits to occur, to remain as they're located there now, and would amend that plat to again allow for that to occur. This was reviewed by the Planning Commission. There was a lot of discussion about that particular item. They did, after discussion, recommend that this be approved, that the subdivision amendment be approved by the council, and we are also recommending that amendment be approved, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay, council, do you have questions?
Gary, I have a question for you. Can you maybe walk us through, the settlement agreement, maybe generally and specifically to this, mostly that we were informed that there was, this action was going on, but we didn't come to an understanding of what that there was a settlement. And so it's just kind of like my question was last time, whereas there's this agreement with these parties that is contingent on us doing something, but we haven't done anything yet. And so I'm just curious if you can walk me through the procedural posture of that.
Sure. Enforcement action began a couple of years ago. I can't remember the exact date, but the city began enforcement action against Mr. Gertsch for the structures that were located beyond that line. We actually came very, very close to a jury trial in October of this year as a result of him not being in compliance with the current statute or ordinances. The courts are prone not to punish somebody, but they're more prone to try and get the individual to bring his property into compliance. The city wondered and doubted that Mr. Gertsch could bring the property in compliance because of that line, and knew that he would have to engage a geotechnical engineer, and then the city would review that with our own geotechnical engineer to be able to determine whether or not that line could be moved. And the original line was designed across all the lots. This particular line that we wanted him to investigate was where the violation was taking place. So he had violating structures, and he had them in an area that he was not allowed to have them. So the two things that the court indicated that he would have to fix were that he would have to fix the location of that static line, and if he couldn't do that, then he would have to remove the structures. And so he went to work within a time, we literally put a time period. We were not willing to move the date of the trial, of the jury trial that was set. And we were ready to proceed forward. So he worked with his attorney and with an engineer to do another static study, another geotechnical study on the slope. They specifically looked at these two lots and the possibility of the sliding and all the concerns that the Planning Commission was aware of during their first approvals, only specific to these two lots. We then took that study that he had done, and our folks looked at it and determined that he actually could put a very, very light structures on the site. The court had a couple of different alternatives. When we filed the action, the court could have said, remove everything and start again once you get your approvals. But the courts are not prone to do that. They're more prone to say, if you can bring it into compliance, bring it into compliance. If you can't, then you remove the structures. And so that's exactly the position that we took, is if you can bring it into compliance, which means going through the subdivision process again to amend the subdivision plat to move that line, going through the geotechnical studies that would be necessary in order to move that line, and then on top of that, there were violations of the building code back there in the way that he had placed the structures that he had put back there. And so we also required that and there were grading issues as well. And we required that he bring the buildings into compliance with the building code. And so he went about working on doing that. And then the other thing he did was he worked on the grading for the site. So essentially what we had was we had a situation where we knew what the courts were requiring or would require of him. If he was not able to accomplish compliance, then he would have to remove the buildings, and we would probably go through a jury trial. He agreed in the stipulation, as we often do in criminal matters, and it's not a big criminal matter because the state legislature said violations of zoning ordinance now are infractions. If you remember the Thatcher amendments a couple of years ago, and an infraction is up to $250 fine, and so it's not much. But the thing about it is that a plea of guilty, which we had Mr. Gertsch enter in this case to violation of the ordinance, exists now on the record because that was part of the settlement agreement that we made, and it was presented to the judge, and the judge accepted his plea of guilty. The courts also would have required, we knew that they would, that he either bring it into compliance or remove them from the property. Well, he was able to bring it into compliance, but we were not confident that in the future, when Mr. Gertsch continues to develop his property or use his property, that he would continue to be in compliance. So in order to assure that, we placed in the development or in the settlement agreement all of the provisions that the geotechnical engineer required for this property to make sure it was in compliance, and all of the provisions that were required for the building code. And then we presented that to the court as a settlement in the matter along with his guilty plea. And so he entered the guilty plea, and he entered the settlement agreement. The judge approved both of them, and the settlement agreement is recorded against the property so that if somebody moves in the future, they have to comply or comport with the terms of that settlement agreement. And it is also referred to on this plat. Once you approve, if you decide to approve the plat amendment this evening, that there's a section specifically referring to the settlement of this case through the settlement agreement that will be recorded with the county recorder's office, that will be part of this permanently, will be part of this amended plat permanently. And so essentially what it comes down to is when a city goes after somebody for zoning violations, this is an ag piece of property, there are certain rights that a property owner has. We felt he was violating those rights by building within an area that he was not permitted to build. He went out, hired a geotech, and we reviewed that with our geotechs and was able to demonstrate that on these two lots, that what he was putting on there would not be a violation, would no longer violate or cause any threat to other properties down below. And we did all of that through the courts. There's not a lot more that you can do if a person brings their property into compliance with the code. There's just not. And if this were an R18 or an R110 or an R20, it may have been different, but it wasn't. And these things are permitted. These types of buildings are permitted. The only thing that was prohibiting them from being permitted was that line, that geotechnical line that we had a problem with. But that was resolved by Mr. Gertz paying for a study that was reviewed by our geotechs that said that these two lots and where he'd placed those buildings now is in compliance with the code. And so that's kind of the way it all came together. I don't know if that helps. But.
So the new study brought it into compliance, and in lieu of, because you wouldn't have had to have accepted that, you could have just said, well, that's what one geotechnical study said. Our people at the city, we don't believe that that's actually going to fly, and you still could have pursued the jury.
Yes.
Sit the jury trial.
If our folks would have said that.
So you're basically saying that you felt like that the geotechnical study was good enough that it would have passed muster if it did go to a jury trial, and that he would have been able to receive a positive outcome in the end anyway, and that you were just allowing him to come into compliance by having this new geotechnical study done.
Yes. So that's exactly right. He would have, if we took it to trial, and infractions aren't subject to jury trials, as you're aware.
So and this is from an action that was before that?
Right.
So
it was, I think it would have been a C back then, but the bottom line is that what would have happened is we would have achieved the same result. We'd have gotten a conviction, right? And then he's either going to bring the property into compliance or he's going to remove the uses. And he chose to try and bring the property into compliance. And he went through the study. I'm not a geotechnical engineer, so I depend on our geotechs to either confirm or not confirm. If you bring it into compliance, there's not a lot. We don't have a case. There's no subsequent case.
Were the geotechnical people from the city surprised that there was such a disparate outcomes in geotechnical surveys that are done in such a short amount of time?
Well, like I say, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, so I really hate to opine on that, but I can see one big major difference, and one was that the original geotechnical study was done all the way across all of the lots, all the way through the entire subdivision. And so a very safe standard, and Chad may have more more information on that. But
I just can show the picture. This
is that I guess I had a follow-up question to that. So, does that mean that the rest of the lots also would follow the same geotechnical follow-up?
Could.
That if they did a similar, more scalpel approach, that they potentially could have their lot lines moved back as well?
Yeah.
And then the last thing I had was just, was any financial compensation to the city as part of the settlement agreement for the time and expenses that we had put into the compliance and litigation?
No, I know there was a fine involved, but there was no restitution or anything on the city's part.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for all that information.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes.
This one doesn't taste good. I don't.
Oftentimes they don't.
I don't. It just seems bizarre that the new line is right next to the smiley face next to the container. And I guess so. My question, a couple of questions. One, it's a consent item, which tells us that we don't really have much to say about this because we were going to vote yes or no, I guess. But from what you just mentioned, we already agreed to a settlement as the city with Mr. Gertsch, and we're here to say, great, we now know you had made the settlement and you think we're there in compliance.
So we've settled a case.
Case is settled.
The case is settled because according to the engineers, our best information, we can't get any better information than the engineers, and we have to rely on them. They're saying that it now complies with the law, with our city ordinance. So if you said no tonight, there would be an appeal based on an administrative appeal to an appeals officer who would say, well, does this comply with your ordinance or not? And if you said yes, if you vote yes, then there's no issue. But if you voted no, it would be appealable to the appeal authority, which would be the ALJ or administrative law judge. And that judge would then take a look at the code, and he'd take a look at whether or not Mr. Gertsch complies with the code and make a determination as to whether or not your administrative decision is correct or not. I know it doesn't feel good, but these properties are different than your regular residential properties. They're still zoned agricultural, which in the middle of the city is a very strange thing to have properties zoned agricultural, and oftentimes those interfere with uses that are common, such as residential uses in an area, and sometimes they're offensive to the people around them. And that's the reason state code actually has a little provision that says, you know what, when you have an agricultural zone next to you, you sometimes expect these different effects to happen.
So we're it's in sensitive lands area, and that's the reason for the geotech studies. I was under the impression that we would have to not just review somebody else's geotech, but do our own, and let us determine, have a third party to say, okay, yeah, we agree with that line, or because we have. I don't want the container rolling down the hill either. If it just seems.
We do have the geotech. I don't know who reviewed the geotech. Do you, Chad, by any chance?
Maybe invite Steve up here and talk about that a little bit.
But I get review, but have our own done. It just seems a little suspect that we have the applicant have the geotech study. We look at it and we're like, oh, okay, but it's not our people.
So we don't perform our own geotech studies. What we do is from the beginning. If I could back all the way back up, there's been at least 3 geotech engineers that have looked at this site. One from a previous developer. The second report was with this development, and then Mr. Gertsch hired this other geotech to evaluate his specific lots. And the finding was that after all of the soil was removed from the site during the construction of the homes, that mitigation effort was substantial enough that the stability of the hillside was actually increased because of all of the soils that were removed during the original construction of the home. And as the geotech evaluated that, the request was not to find out how far the line should move to the east. It was to find out if the line just east of that that container was acceptable in order to bring the property into compliance. If that helps clarify a little bit about the situation. Now, the line does not move on any of the other lots except these two, because these were the only two lots that have done that analysis. But if additional analyses are done for the other lots, it's possible that those could move as well, based on the finding that the dirt removal was substantial and brought a lot of the load that would possibly compromise that hillside down. So, does that help?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. If there's an issue with this in the future, who's responsible?
Well,
the container rolls down the hill and goes through someone's backyard and through someone's house. I mean, I don't know, but we've had homes slide into the hollow before, a couple.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're talking about something that might not ever happen.
Yeah. So responsibility or liability depends on who is responsible for. I can tell you that from the slides that we've had in the past, the geotechnical engineer holds a lot of that responsibility. That's what their errors and omissions are for. That's what they essentially pay for. And that's who paid for a lot of them on Heather Drive. I don't know, the city is not responsible for it, if that's what you're asking. We don't make that decision that this is safe. We go off of the engineering studies that we receive from people who are trained to do that, to make those decisions. And so, if another part of the answer to the question is, in the state of Utah, you've got comparative negligence. So it may be that, for example, if Mr. Gertz came in and brought 50 truckloads of dirt, which would be in violation of the agreement, and also of the zoning requirements, he could be held responsible for it. If Mr. Gertz let his sprinklers run perpetually, he would be responsible for it. To what degree, it depends on how much responsibility belonged to the engineer and how much belonged to the guy who let his sprinklers run. That's kind of the way the civil courts move.
So Gary, can he add additional containers to this area?
No.
So what's there is all that's going to be approved then?
That's it. And that's the reason we filed the agreement, was to say, this is it. This is, your engineer has opined that this much weight on that hillside is not a problem. But we're not willing to allow anything more. And so that's the reason the settlement agreement is filed with the county, and now becomes part of the plat approval. So,
okay.
Is the unit acceptable?
Is the container?
The container, because I know we have
That's a good
other
question. Yeah.
things that say they're not acceptable.
So Chad probably can answer that as well as anybody, but the simple answer is containers are allowed in certain zones.
Okay, agricultural.
Agricultural is one of those zones where you can use containers. So.
Okay.
The other thing that applicable to that is that there's still, a building permit has to be obtained for those, and we have had initial inspections on those structures. The carport structure is the largest of the structures there. It does have some tie downs, different things that have been done that our building official has looked at initially. This is something where we have to have a plat amendment recorded before we can issue that building permit, but it has been looked at, and there will have to be one that, there will have to be a building permit issued, is what I mean to say.
So does that have to have a foundation?
It doesn't, no.
You can just sit it there?
No, there'll be some type of tie down that'll be required. So similar to what you'd see maybe like on a mobile home where there's a tie down system.
Right.
There's things that are inserted in the ground to make sure it stays. But
right.
Yep.
But we have a R112, whatever you want to call it, that do not accept these containers. Is that true?
Yeah, we've restricted storage containers in those other residential zones.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a question. I'm glad that Steve mentioned the dirt being removed, because I heard that in your report, and that was really the main reason why, with this new study, the pressures on the sensitive lands were mitigated. I think the issue, and many of us are feeling up here, is that what was done initially out of compliance has now allowed for something to be in compliance, and that's what feels odd about this topic here. My question is, where the structure is, there's paved land. It's not necessarily a road, maybe it's a private road, I don't know, but it appears as though it's some type of pavement or something. What is that pavement, or what is it sitting on?
There's no pavement. There's some gravel back there, but there's no pavement back there.
Okay, because it just looks very long.
Yeah.
And I wasn't certain about what exactly that was. And then I appreciate you all giving us the specifics about not so much moving the line itself, but identifying if the barrens of the unit can be sustained. So it's not necessarily moving the line is the way I'm understanding this. And also the provision you put in the settlement agreement was that Mr. Gertsch cannot put anything else past the original eastern line.
That's correct.
And so that says still that to me says you probably shouldn't have done that, or not probably, but you shouldn't have done that. And so I think that's why things are a little unsettled. Because otherwise, why not just leave the new line and not put in the provision of saying, well, you can't build anything else past the original line that was set to begin with?
It's based on the study that was done. The study was specific to the structures that were constructed and to the amount of material that was removed for those structures. So, yeah, that's the reason why.
Hey, Chad, can you speak to the access point of this particular Connex container? How does he access this?
So there's a couple different places that historically have been access to it. It will be accessed through the applicant's lot. I think there's maybe some asphalt grindings. I'm trying to remember what that. It's not pavement though. It's something that's been placed on there just as a kind of a gravel surface there. So that would be accessed through his property, the applicant's property, in the future. I think in the past they did take some access while other adjacent structures were under construction. They took some access through those other methods, but the access, as we've understood from the applicant, will be across his own property.
Okay. Councilman Bloxham, did you have another question?
Yeah, I mean, Gary, so what you're saying is that this settlement agreement, he's brought into compliance. We don't believe, like if we vote no here today, that the appeal authority is going to reverse it because he's in compliance, and that's the standard that the courts want to see, is that they want to see if it's brought into compliance and they have some scientific reason why it's brought into compliance, which I'm guessing doesn't happen very often, which is probably why it's so weird, where someone's not in compliance with something, they get held into court on an infraction or whatever was before that. They say, well, we're going to hire an expert to go show you that it's actually in compliance. And then the city says, go ahead, good luck. Well, they come back and say, look, it is in compliance. So my guess is this doesn't happen very often. That's just my assumption.
So it's interesting because it happens more regularly than you think, not for scientific reasons, but because people bring their property into compliance. So what you've got is you got a violation of the law. And we had that with Mr. Gertsch. Ultimately, he pled guilty to violating the law. He violated the law. He built beyond the line. He didn't have his buildings inspected, and so he pled guilty to that. And as part of that guilty plea, we entered an agreement with him that says, I'm not ever going to do this again. I'm not ever going to violate the law again. In fact, I'm going to make sure my property stays in compliance. So what he did was, and a lot of times you'll have for example, a lot of equipment or tires or whatever stored on a parcel of property. We'll go out and we'll cite them for that. And then what they'll do is we'll put together a plan for cleaning it up, and they'll go ahead and clean it up. And so ultimately they'll come and bring it into compliance. doesn't mean they weren't guilty when the tires were there before, right? And so they do plead guilty, but we'll often put together a plan for them to bring it into compliance. In this situation, it is weird because you have science underlying the compliance.
Right.
No pun intended, but the primary reason, one of the primary reasons, a lot of times in a subdivision, you'll have a geotechnical report for the subdivision. But interestingly enough, is in sensitive lands, we require tell me if I'm wrong, Chad, on this, but we require a geotechnical report on individual lots as well. Because oftentimes the geotechnical report that will be just general for the subdivision might not be specific enough for certain lots, for lots. And so many times we'll require a specific geotechnical report for the particular lot. That's kind of what happened here.
Yeah.
Is when he actually did the geotechnical, he's at the very end of the big report, but I can tell you that it's not unusual for a single lot report to be different than the.
Yeah. It's just like the tire example you give. It's like if you broke the law by putting the tires on there, and the way to remove it to become in compliance is to remove what you put on. Whereas in this situation, he built something that was not in compliance, and he didn't change anything other than the actual building of it made it into compliance later somehow.
Yep.
Which is just it's like maybe the idea that he put it into compliance doesn't really register with me, because he really didn't put it into compliance. He just happened into compliance because the way he moved the dirt around, the geotechnical report came back and said that looks good. And I'm not saying the geotechnical report's not correct or that I don't understand. I don't understand why the staff isn't wanting us to move forward with this. I actually understand where the argument comes from, and from a legal standpoint, we have a settlement agreement, and it's in compliance, and we don't believe it would be, worth it to move forward, considering that he's shown that he's now in compliance. But it's different than removing the tires, because he didn't really change anything. The actual infraction itself is what made it in compliance, which is just kind of a bizarre chicken and egg thing.
Let me add one more thing, and that is if there was a building with the tires and the building was not consistent with our building code, which sometimes happens, that would need to be brought into compliance as well. And so there were two aspects to this. One was, does that line really prohibit this type of agricultural building from being built on that location? And the answer was, yeah, at the time it did, but if he were to build a major barn there, I don't think the geotechnical engineer would have opined that you can do that.
Yeah.
If he'd put a heavy barn on that location.
Hey, he just lucked into whatever he put there.
Yeah.
Ended up making it into compliance. It's just a pretty good luck there. And I'm not being sarcastic. I'm just saying, if he would have put some other structure on there, it would not have come into compliance. But because of what he put on there and
a bigger structure, a heavier structure.
Right,
yeah.
that it actually did come into compliance. It's just a bizarre outcome. And I understand why the city would go forward with the legal aspect, and I understand why they would maybe push the brakes a little bit to try to make sure that we're not causing any more money and expenses and time to be wasted on something that we would maybe lose now that he's proven geotechnically that it can come into pass. So just a strange one. So that's why I'm grateful that Councilman Morris removed it, just so we could have this discussion, because it's been very helpful. So thank you.
I think another point to that, if I may, is we've had a history of interacting with Mr. Gertz. I think he would agree with that. And it hasn't always been positive. So this is not, from the city's staff's perspective, an issue of convenience or acquiescence just to get the issue out of there. It's exactly the opposite. But the fact is, as I think Gary and Chad have tried to say, to me it's a matter of intellectual honesty. The fact is, despite the differences we've had through the years with Ed and him with us, the fact is he said, this is what you have to do, And we set the terms of that. He didn't set the terms of that. And we said, you must do this and this and this and this and this to our satisfaction. And he has met that. And so we don't hold grudges. Okay, we say you either meet the law or you don't meet the law. And Mr. Gertz has met the law. And so that's what this is about from the staff's perspective. Now, we hope we learn from this, and we hope that Ed learns from this, and we have a better relationship going forward. But if a man or a woman who is out of violation comes into and meets the ordinances, then I think you wouldn't want a staff that would recommend something that they, for convenience reasons, but I don't think you'd also want a staff that when somebody met all the ordinances of the city to hold a grudge against a citizen and say, well, because of the way you did it initially, we're not going to support this. And we've had a lot of discussions about that and spent a lot of time on it, but we really do. We wouldn't be recommending, I hope you understand that, we would not be recommending that this be approved this evening if we didn't feel good about it and believe it was the right thing to do given all the circumstances. It's obviously not popular, but we're not in the popular business. You ask us to do a job, and that's what we're trying to do. So it is a complicated issue, but I wanted to understand that from the staff's perspective, that's the only way we've approached it. We set the conditions, said you must meet this. He went out and spent the money, the time to do it. And then shame on us if we say from the staff side, well, yeah, you did everything we asked you to do, Ed, required, but we don't like the way you did it. So we're going to recommend no. We said we're recommending yes because you have met the conditions.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on this?
Yeah, maybe this has been mentioned. Chad, can you go to the one that shows the new line and the original one? I think it was blue and yellow. Is that what it was? On the satellite image? Mm-hmm. Yeah, blue and red. So, well, first of all, Gary, you said that the court decided that it's now in compliance. Is that right, according to our code?
According to our code, it is.
I would say, except it shouldn't be there. It's in compliance if it was allowed to be there. Right. But up until right now, the building line is that red line. And now if we approve this blue line, this new static slope line, then it's okay, we approve this new static line, but you still can't do anything east of the red line. So we're still holding to the red line is what I see. But we're moving it just for this building. And I understand the legal discussion that we've had, but it's still, we've talked about in other topics tonight, setting precedents, and I think that's valid in this instance also.
So maybe, if I might, a clarification, you correct me, but I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about the idea of holding to the red line. We're not holding to the red line, if we use that vernacular, because we think it's unsafe beyond that. Through this discussion, and Chad, you can correct me, Mr. Gertz indicated he has no intention of building anything else. And so based on that voluntary position, we said, okay, then the way that we prove that and ensure that, because that would require an additional study, because as was said, the study that moved it only looked at, is it safe with the structure that is in place? It didn't look if he built a barn or this or that or the other. And so when Ed, as I recall, volunteered to say, I'm not going to build anything else up there, we said, okay, then let's establish that in writing by staying with that line for any other future buildings. So it has nothing to do from staff's perspective, engineering perspective of safety. It was simply to keep a margin of a buffer, if you will, so that hopefully this issue does not have to be revisited down the road, is that whether it's Mr. Gertz or somebody else that owns the property then comes in and says, well, I'd like to put something else on it, and I want to do another study. And so we keep inching along with this thing. This finalizes, I think, from a legal perspective, finalizes everything. Nothing else will be built on that. So does that make sense? I haven't explained that very well, but it's...
No, it makes sense, except it shouldn't have happened, is my only concern.
Well, it would. Again, I'm saying too much, but what if... again, I'm not trying to defend Ed. Again, we've had our differences, but if Ed had not built the structure, but he wanted to build the structure, and he would have come to the city and said, I'd like to build a structure back there, what would we have said to him? You can't do it because of that red line. And he could have asked, okay, what do we need to do? What do I need to do in order to demonstrate that I can build back there? And we probably would have said, because he knew that that original study, as has been said, was a general study for the subdivision. Gary said that happens all the time. And then when you look at an individual lot, it may come out different, it may come out the same. If he would have said to us, well, I would like to do a study of my own lot to see if that would work, it's likely the staff, at least from the staff perspective, we would have said, sure, you can do that. We wouldn't have said, no, you don't have the ability, the right to do that, but these are the conditions that you have to meet. If in that case, if the results would have been the same based on this specific type of use, my guess is nobody would be, staff wouldn't, and we wouldn't be having this dilemma. And this is all very legitimate. None of this is negative. But that's the way we've looked at it, is if he went through the right process, whether he's doing it after the fact or before the fact, which would have been much better, the data, the facts are what the facts are. And that's why it's, that's the approach we're taking, if that makes sense, is he could have done that and we would have applauded him for following the right process. And I don't think there have been any questions asked, but because of the circumstances there are. But that's how we've looked at it, right or wrong.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question that, just because I know that the concern there is what's taken place. So we understand that he cannot put any more structures there, but that's a lot of ground that if I owned it, I'd want to put it to good use or be able to put something, use it for anything. Case in point, if I have a construction company, I'd probably want to throw some gravel in there and park some more tractors or utility equipment because I'm agricultural. That's possible, correct?
So the settlement agreement is very limiting. He could not put, for example, any new structures back there.
I know, but we're only talking vehicles.
He couldn't bring excavating equipment in there and park it. Can he bring a tractor for taking care of the 3 acres that he owns? Yeah, he could certainly do that. He can do anything that you can on a farm.
Right.
And he could do that before this whole thing came up. He can, if we wanted to change the law regarding homes in the middle of residential areas and what should or should not be allowed on a lot, an agricultural lot, when it's in the middle of a residential area, we can do that. That's your decision as a council. There are some limitations. State law says, you know what, we respect agricultural uses. We respect them more. That's probably a large reason why he left it agricultural. It meets our ordinance. 1 acre, 1 home. You're allowed to do that in Layton City. If we want to limit the types of agricultural uses that you can put on an agricultural piece of property, if it's surrounded by folks that may not like it, we could do that. You could do that. You can make a law to do that. But the problem is you got to live by the laws that you make. You can't make them after the fact. You can't say, well, now that's ugly. I'm sorry, we don't like that anymore. And because we live around that area and we just don't like the way that it looks. And we don't think it should be there. If this were out in West Layton on its own, probably it wouldn't have even raised an eyebrow, right? But we don't have those laws in place. You can put them in place, you have that power, but you just can't do them after the fact. So that's the only problem.
Okay, I was just trying to bring up the point that, hey, this is, that's a lot of land. He's still going to be able to use it. He needs to be able to use it. I mean, quite honestly, that's a very beautiful ridge, all those expensive homes along there. I think it's very impressive. I just know that this is kind of an unusual circumstances that we're dealing with here tonight, and it definitely puts the council in a very peculiar situation on how they're going to handle this. But council, I feel like we've deliberated this enough that, are you ready to make some action here, or so that we can kind of move on? We still have our public hearing yet to go, and we need to reconvene again later, so I'm just cognizant of your time as well.
Are you saying we close the public meeting?
No, this isn't a public hearing. This is a consent item. It's a single item that we will take action on. So I guess my question is, are you ready to take action?
Yeah. I move that we approve Shepherd's Ridge, First Amendment, approximately 2230 North Church Street.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we approve the Shepherd Ridge subdivision. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote. Okay, Councilmember Roberts?
No.
Councilman Bloxham?
Yes.
Councilman Morris?
No.
Councilman Smith Edmondson?
No.
Councilman Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, I lost track.
3 to 2.
3 to 2, right? No.
No.
So I guess at this point, Gary, you've got some work to do.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and start to put together ALJ, and maybe that would be an easier way to do it.
All righty. Okay, let's go ahead and move on with our meeting tonight. We still, like I said, have the public hearing yet to go through. So with that, our first item is a development guidelines and standards for ordinance 22-20. And I know that Steve Jackson is going to present that information for us.
Mayor, Council, good to be here with you tonight. Before you is the amendment to the Development Guidelines and Design Standards, Ordinance 22-20. The Engineering Division currently maintains a set of development guidelines and design standards for the purpose of informing developers of the current guidelines and standards to assist them in meeting those standards. Some of those guidelines and standards require updates and revisions occasionally. Section 19.10.240 of the Layton City Municipal Code allows for the engineer to draft, approve, adopt, interpret, and amend the guidelines from time to time as determined necessary, and the state of Utah code requires that the guidelines be adopted and amended by ordinance. So this year we have amended some key items in the standards and guidelines. Those include secondary water systems. As we've now acquired Case Creek irrigation, we need to have development or guidelines for how those new areas with secondary water will be built out. Traffic impact study thresholds have been updated to the most current edition of the ITE trip generation manual. The dedication plat and lot line adjustments have been made to the rear lot public utility and drainage easements to reduce them from 10 feet to 5 feet. And then also we've clarified some street widths to be consistent with the next item that's coming before you, which is our private streets discussion that we had earlier. The staff would recommend that the council adopt ordinance 22-20, amending the development guidelines and design standards. This is a public hearing, so we recommend also that take any comments.
So council, we can do one of two things. You can go ahead and open up the public hearing and have deliberation, or you're welcome to have your deliberation now and then open up the public hearing. I'll entertain it either way. In other words, do any of you have any questions on this or comments? Okay, seeing that there are none, I'll look for a motion to open our public hearing.
I move that we open the public hearing for ordinance 22-20.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. And I take it all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll entertain any comments from our public, should there be any, at this time.
Sorry for the peanut gallery.
Okay. Since that there's no comment at this time, I'll bring it back to the council. And being that we only have 2 items on our public hearing, I'm actually going to leave the public hearing open.
Thank you.
So with that, though, we'll go ahead and take action regarding this first item. So I'll call for a vote or your intentions of the ordinance 22-20.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt the amendment to the Development Guidelines and Design Standards Ordinance 22-20.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we adopt the development guidelines and design standards. I'll do a roll call vote on this. Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith Edmondson?
Aye.
Councilman Morris?
Aye.
Councilman Bloxham?
Yes.
Councilman Roberts?
Yes.
Okay, you have it. It's unanimous. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to item number B. And this is an amendment to the Layton City Municipal Code, and Mr. Chad Wilkinson will be presenting this ordinance to us, which is 22-21.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is an amendment really related to private street standards in our city predominantly. It is ordinance 22-21. We've had a couple of discussions with the council about this. We had a previous discussion. That discussion was continued to allow for the opportunity for others to give input on this ordinance. To date, we haven't had any input on that ordinance from any of those folks, but I just wanted to go through very briefly, for the sake of the public that's here, just a very quick summary. So there's a number of code sections that are listed on the agenda. What that comes down to is an attempt by staff to consolidate, to organize these standards in a way that's much more friendly towards administration and also towards understanding by the development community as they come in and look at what the standards are for these private streets. One of the things we did, besides putting it in a table format, which previously to this it was in a very long text kind of format, this has consolidated that, shortened it. We also came up with very specific designations for each of these private street types. In the past, we kind of used these terms interchangeably, and it caused some confusion. So we've consolidated that. We've come up with those specific names to describe each of these various private street types, along with the types of development that they can serve. Second thing that we did, something that we needed to do to address an area that the code was somewhat silent on, was to allow for gates in certain circumstances and to set the criteria when those gates would be allowed. So that's the second part of that. We've talked about that a little bit as council in the last couple of meetings, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Third thing was, again, to look at areas where private streets were connecting to public streets. Well, that's been an issue in the past in the city where it's created some concern and some I guess some areas of concern from residents and also some concern from staff as far as those conflicts that can sometimes occur because of that. So we've specified when private lanes, private drives, private streets, when they can be used, and also prohibited that they cannot be used to connect more than two public roads. So that should be a public street connection if there's a need to connect those. Just a couple other things. We did make a change related to this issue, related to some of our rear-loaded type developments, and that is to allow for a change to our PU and DEs only in the very specific instance of the MUTOD. Now, MUTOD means mixed-use transit-oriented development. There's only one spot that's zoned that in the city. It's our downtown. Those areas that we want to have more of that urban look and feel where buildings should be closer to the street, we've allowed for in those very specific circumstances when there's an opportunity to provide for utilities in other locations or other ways that would be allowed to be waived in that very specific location. Lastly, as Steve's already mentioned, we've made some adjustments to our sections of the code. They've made some adjustments to the engineering sections. We've made some adjustments to make that consistent in our section of the code related to our rear lot PU and DEs on those. One other change that's related to these private streets, in our condo townhome standards, we wanted to make sure that we have a minimum rear-to-rear separation to make sure that those streets and those buildings don't conflict with each other, that there's adequate room for these streets to be constructed and for buildings to be constructed adjacent to the streets without some of the conflicts we found in the past related to footings and foundations. So we've increased that to 30 feet. That would provide for a couple feet on either side to make sure we don't have conflicts. So with that, this was reviewed by the Planning Commission, was reviewed by the City Council at a previous meeting, continued to provide for some additional comment. We'd like to recommend that the City Council adopt Ordinance 22-21 after taking whatever public comment we may have tonight. So, and my recommendation would be that rather than going through each of those sections that are listed there, you could simply make the motion to adopt Ordinance 22-21 as listed. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing. If anyone's wished to comment, or council, if you have any comments as well, you're welcome to deliberate at this time. Okay, seeing that there's none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to the council then for action regarding ordinance 22-21.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt ordinance 22-21 as listed.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second that we adopt ordinance 22-21. Again, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Roberts?
And close the public hearing.
Oh, excuse me, very good. Thank you. I love it. Okay, so I've acknowledged the motion here to close the public hearing and adopt ordinance 22-21 as stated. So with that, again, like I said, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Roberts?
Yes.
Foxham?
Yes.
Morris?
Aye.
Smith Edmondson?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
Okay, there you have it. It's unanimous. Okay, that concludes our public hearing on the agenda items. We do have some unfinished business, so council, I'll look for a motion to go back into a closed-door meeting.
I move we go back into a closed-door meeting.
Okay, and second. Okay, thank you. Thank you those folks that did attend tonight, and we appreciate your patience and hope to see you again in a more positive manner.